you out of your sleep like when a toddler creeps. Totality of the deep, the mere thought of an unconscious manifestation carried out with the beat. Positive charged protons creating neural explosions. Time hiccups when fingers and pads touch. Dead air smiles because it knows what's coming. The countenance of the clock claps hands. The choreography of the knock slaps jams. And you be like, who made this? Vertebrae responding to the call so bad to make a B-girl curve the wall.
Greetings. Grade 2 of the 2022 winter break. I don't know if I want to say break, and I'm super excited. An author by the name of Alan King. Let me go ahead and read. Is an author, a poet, a journalist, lives with his family in Bowie, Maryland. Art and domestic issues. He's for a national nonprofit and Beats in Life Global Journal of Hip Hop. As a staff writer for the Baltimore Afro, King often, when covering housing, his three-part series, redevelopment, and the together stakeholders, i.e., the officials and developers, gave vulnerable residents up the city's blighted. During a trip to Kingston, Jamaica, King to the island's rich highlighting its national heroes and Bob Marley. Additions from slavery to understand the significance of the 7th Independence Day celebration. Assistant at the Center for Public Watchdog Organization, investigative journalist, King examples of corruption, the buying of the presidency. King is the author of Published under the Press Silver 16 and Drift, Aquarius Press in 2012, visiting author for Penn Fall Program. He's readers and writers through that. Bruckner, his teacher, put it, help young people happens rather than happened in history. Fellowships from Kale Khanum is of our nation's arts. 3 pushcart fellas, 3 nominations for the net selection. Graduate of the Stowe Residency Program, Southern Maine. His poem here in various literary journals featured on public. Alan King, welcome to.
Hey, yeah, thank you for having me. And I have to add, because my current publisher, I need to update my bio, so this is on me, but also the author of Crooked Smiling Light, and that was published by Plan B Press last year. So I didn't want my publisher to see this and be like, oh, what happened? But thank you so much, Monty.
Congratulations on
Thank
the
you.
recognition writer, as an investigative journalist, as a member of a larger company. Much for taking time out of your to talk with young people who are interested in arts. Probably really as a result of COVID, we for alternative spring break in person visit creative businesses in DC and Baltimore in New York. But COVID start doing virtual programming and said we'll be doing in person. Let's do some poets, bloggers, to really just get a sense of us that people have taken arts. And you involved in multiple facets of So interviews with questions about first question I love to ask more about people's family history. How who was the oldest you are aware of that you can trace your if it's just grandparents or if it's oldest member of
Oh,
your family.
yeah. So unfortunately, yeah, I have to do one of those family tree traces because I mean, unfortunately, the fa farthest I can go is my grandparents,
That's cool.
and I may have to. I don't know. Maybe at some point it may turn into an audio project or just an audio passion project that I do just to learn more about my family history. But I've been getting little sprinkles of stories about my maternal grandparents who are from Barbados, and I'm getting little sprinklings from my paternal grandparents who, I'm still a little fuzzy on the
Let's just
family origins,
share what
but
you
it,
know.
it
Like let's
so
just share
what
what you
yeah,
know.
yeah, so what I know is that my grandparents, both my paternal and maternal grandparents, my grandfathers, maternal and paternal, both built their homes on the same street. So my parents actually grew up 5 houses from each other on Chinapoo Hill in Mova, and it's that's their neighborhood in Trinidad. So it's they grew up in Mova, but on Chinapoo Hill. And so I think the last time I went back to Trinidad was in my 20s, and I'm 41, so long overdue for a trip back. But I think last time I went, I remember being on Chinapoo Hill. Before my dad showed me his childhood home, he jokingly said, "Guess which house I grew up in?" And it's a joke because my dad had sent he had sent like a water, it's like a big barrel, to because the plumbing there was, at least the plumbing at his childhood house was different. So it's almost like a little mini water tower that where all the water from the house comes from. And so it was a joke because his name is painted all over it, Winston. So, I just happened to look up, see his name painted on it like 3 times, but that was what they had to do to ship, to make sure that it was shipped to the right place. But yeah, it's cool. It's cool hearing childhood stories of my parents, growing up 5 houses from each other, going to primary school together. And then I think just they each left Trinidad at different times, and didn't know where the other was. I think my mom went to Canada, where where most of her side of the family is, and it's really cool how eventually they reconnected in the U.S. and got married, picked back up, got married, and had me and my siblings. So you know,
Well, cool. Let's go ahead. Usually, I've found, especially for creatives, have had sized level of influence, being an example of being encouraging about your parents. Now
mhm.
we know they're and reconnected as adults, as a profession,
Oh, could you say that one more time? Because I'm hearing bits and pieces.
as a profession.
Oh, I'm sorry, one more time.
Your parents do as a profession.
Oh, so my dad. Well, I'll start with my mom. So my mom is she was an X-ray technician, and then she worked in an orthopedic doctor's office. It was housed over in what used to be Providence Hospital. Then it became the medical center. And my mom is retired now, but for most of her profession, I knew my mom to be an X-ray technician, and so it was kind of cool because when I was a kid and I had sprained a toe doing something silly. She took me to her job, and her boss, Dr. Manning, x-rayed my foot and got me set. So she was always an x-ray technician. I thought it was cool to let folks know that. My dad is a master electrician, and he's self-employed. And I write about him in my new book, Crooked Smiling Light, and just because my dad's a storyteller, and so I think that's where I get it from. And so growing up, I would always hear stories about how he started off at the union, when he was working for Truman, and then he was able to go out on his own. He got his own truck and started his own business. And so I've always been proud of him because when I was, I think, from middle school even into college, during the winter breaks and summer breaks, he would always take me and my brother to work with him. And he was always a neat worker. And one of the things that he prides himself on about being neat is that, his work has been featured in magazines, contractor magazines for, other electricians and stuff like that. But he's, very neat, very knowledgeable. Um, and I think I got into journalism because I liked one of the things I liked about his job was that because it wasn't an office job, he was always going to a different client. Each day looked different. So, like, we were going to different clients' homes. I thought it was cool that for his job, we moved around a lot. And so I think I like journalism because while when you're writing a story, you're stationary, but when you're out gathering the story, you're bouncing around. So those were some similarities I saw as between my profession as a journalist at that time with his profession as an electrician.
Parents had very technical. How did they feel about their son space? Even though I know you work journalism organization, feel about that?
So my mom was always supportive. My dad was supportive, so his support was more so. So I'll start with with the whole writing. When that started, I was actually writing poetry before I got into journalism. And so my dad, that's poetry, like creative arts. That's a foreign world to my dad. He didn't understand it, but he supported it by, like, if I needed to go to a workshop, when I was in high school, couldn't afford to, pay for the workshop myself. He would pay for those workshops. So he supported financially my artistic interest. He didn't understand it though, and I think he thought it was a phase. He thought it was something I was going to outgrow and go on to do something more serious. My mom, on the other hand, was always supportive. Like, I was always, in the kitchen with her when she was cooking. I was always sharing poems by my favorite poets. So and for my mom, that was her only exposure to poetry was when she was cooking and I was hanging out with her in the kitchen. And so, through those experiences, my mom would hear poems by Sonia Sanchez, Tim Siebels, a lot of my favorite poets. And so it was for her, she knew it was natural for me to, when I was thinking of what my profession was going to be when I got to college, it seemed natural to her for me to go into journalism. My dad was like, again, his whole mind was around how, he wanted to know. I think what needed to make sense for him was how you make money. Can you live off of this? Can you support a family with this? And it's a kind of thinking that it's old school. It's a type of thinking that comes from an era when the economy was one way, what was a different way. So like it's a kind of thinking that comes kind of out of the I guess like the trade and factory mentality. And so what I mean by that is like you know, people of my father's generation, it was understood that if they got a job with a union or a factory, that whatever they made, they would eventually be able to buy a home, support a family, and those things. Well, the economy is doesn't work the way it did when my father was coming up. So there were a lot of things he didn't understand about, this whole writing thing. And I think recently he asked me, he's like, "Is there money in poetry?" And I said, "Well, yeah, the money." I said, "There is money, but the really big money is in the prizes." And when I start running off some prizes like the MacArthur Genius Grant, the Kingsley Tufts Award, and these are hundreds of thousands of dollars, then it started to register with him like, "Oh, you can make that much money, Tony." We were talking on the phone, but even though I couldn't see that light bulb moment, I could almost hear like the switch, like the pop, and he was like, "Oh, okay." So then he was intrigued, but he supported the way that he knew how to support at the time.
I love the kitchen with your mom while she's cooking. One of the other questions I love to ask if I interview you is creative memory. So, what was your earliest creative memory? You can share that memory of
Oh,
doing something creative.
oh man. So I would say one of my earliest creative memories. I mean, like I got into poetry in middle school. And well, I did poetry before in elementary school, but the way it was taught, like I really didn't like poetry. We had to memorize a poem, get in front of the class, recite it. If you couldn't recite the poem, then you lost your recess. And so really wasn't a good encounter for me with poetry. But in middle school, when I started writing it, and I was writing a lot of rhyming poems, and it was fun. It was fun finding the rhyming word and the rhythms and everything of it was fun. But I think, and I had another good memory in high school because my English teacher my senior year was the first poet that I actually met. He wouldn't just teach it, but he would bring his own poems into class and say, "Can I run some stuff by you?" And he was the my introduction to like open mics. Like I didn't know that poems could be read aloud in front of an audience. I didn't know that there were people there receptive to that. So that was another good memory. But I'll say that my my like a creative memory that really shines though is when I was at the University of Maryland, and we were actually at the University of Maryland together. I think when I was there, you were the vice president of the Black Student Association. I was there when some stuff had went down, and the BSA had a meeting in the Numburu circle. But yeah, during that time, I had joined a Big Brother big sibling program, I should say. And I say that because I signed up for a big sister, and it was actually my big sister at the University of Maryland. She found out she knew that I liked doing poetry, and so she actually went and did some research and found some open mics. And actually, she and I went to Bar Nun. And so that was my intro into the DC creative scene. And from there I have great memories of just building my community. Some people from that community are still present in my life, like Derek Weston Brown. And yeah, I mean, he's really the only constant from that time, but there are a few trickles of other folks from you know the early the early community days that are still around. But yeah, my creative memory starts from there. I credit my big sister, my campus big sister, for really putting that boot on my behind to really get me out and reading at the open mics.
And so I didn't know that you were a part of the big program Biggs program at
Hmm.
interesting, bro. That far. And I used to go to bar. It's so crazy. To be very and I would always be at the end. Come and be there the whole time, but I'd not be late or getting ready to go. Um, what kind of an impact do you think community had on your development? Because this broadcast, if who are interested in pursuing to yours as some of the other folks were important, was it for you to find a community, develop your craft?
Oh man, like so I'll even speak about another community that was kind of going on while I was building my in-person community. So Derek Weston Brown, another poet, he and I actually met on the freestyle board of OK Player. And so for a lot of folks who posted on okplayer.com, um, it was unlike any other message board that I think a lot of us had ever been on because this was a message board where, people who posted on the boards, they would find each other in their own cities. And then once there was a cluster of them, I think here in DC, we were known as the DC OK players. Then there were the New York City OK players, the Philly OK players. And I mean, it was so serious. We were doing these road trips to meet the other OK players. But the importance of community was that prior to meeting these folks on the message board, like I fell into the trap that a lot of young poets, especially poets who had just started writing, fall into. And that was, I didn't, I was like, oh, I'm not reading anybody because I don't want their stuff to influence mine. And I got my own sound and all this, right? And, unwittingly, me and the other people who thought that way was sounding like other people who didn't want to read, because we didn't want to be influenced. And you could tell. And I went to Bar Nun, and I'm so glad you weren't there when I was on the mic because, again, I was getting up, I was getting on the mic, I didn't know what I was doing. I was imitating what I thought a poet was supposed to be, what a poet was supposed to sound like. And I got booed, I got heckled. Um, and at the time, it was a little, it was a lot crushing. But looking back, I think it was just a tough lesson. I wasn't reading anybody, wasn't studying. So community, the OK Player community, would post on the boards, and we comment on each other's work and stuff like that. But then there were folks on the board who became my friends in real life because they lived in DC. We'd meet up. They would say, "Hey, you may want to check out Nikki Giovanni. You may like Nikki Giovanni stuff." So then I started reading Nikki Giovanni and started going out and buying all of her books and just absorbing Nikki Giovanni. Then somebody said, "Well, if you like Nikki Giovanni, you're gonna love Sonia Sanchez." And I went crazy on some Sonia Sanchez. Went and I think. Well, I was a college kid, and I hate to make this college cliche, but broke college kid. So I couldn't afford all of Sonia Sanchez's books, so I would buy her selected collecteds, and so that way I had like, I could get a taste of all her earlier works and then her new stuff. And so I went out and got "Shake Loose My Skin," and I probably read that book from cover to cover. I lost count. Like I stopped. I lost count after like the fifth, probably the fifth or sixth time I read it from cover to cover. Then they put me on the Yusef Komunyak, and they were just throwing all these poets at me, and I was reading them. And one of the cool things I noticed was subconsciously my writing started to get better because while I was reading and enjoying the poet's work, I was also learning what was possible on the page, what was possible in terms of technique and learning new techniques and applying some of those techniques to my work. So had I not had that online community, I probably would have, well, not probably, I definitely would have come to that realization much later than I did. So my community helped speed that learning for me. And my community also, when I got to a point where I started getting claps and applause and stuff, my community also helped keep me grounded, you know. So it's the community is everything, I think, in the arts. You know, you need people to bounce ideas off of, and you need people to, you know, help you sharpen your sword, you know. So
I got to say, most people from DC talk about that. You're the first person who talked about my fair share of poems got a golf clap. But how did that, like, basically that cultivated because people didn't just stepped in to help and to say, well, maybe um, I've already described as you to read more. What was it you talk about? Kind of you've shared dramatic experiences with potentially losing recess, being out in a community. How has how did the impact urging you to do better to kinds of poetry?
okay, so yeah, again, it's coming in bits and pieces. But were you asking how the community impacted me on?
That is not coming through. So
Yeah, it's
what
like,
I was let's try it again. So those negative experiences impact just reading to get
hold on, I'm
um
yeah,
so
because I'm
it might
hearing it's
it might be
okay. Let me see. Let me
so hopefully have his audio situation together the whole podcast because I see I've got activity. So hopefully
Sorry, can you hear me?
yep, can you
Yeah, it's yeah.
copy on
So
my end?
yeah, Silvana. I'm looking at Silvana's comment. So Silvana's saying that it's also sounding choppy on your end.
Huh. Okay, well how about now? Still can you still not hear me?
I can hear you, but it's like a delay.
Can we talk about um, studying undergrad?
Oh, you said studying under who?
Undergrad. What did you study
Grad, what did you
at the
study at the
University?
university? Oh, so I was at University of Maryland for a little bit. Um, I always had to tell this story. So I was at the University of Maryland for a little bit, and by the time I got to Maryland, I was coming from being an introverted high school kid to like a crazy extroverted college student. So I didn't anyway, I didn't stay at the University of Maryland long. But when I got to Howard, I had already, prior to leaving Maryland, I had already had an interest in communications. So when I got to Howard, was when I went into their communications program, and it was Good. Like I was, to be honest, like initially I was snobbish because I was like, well, I'm a poet, and I'm just doing journalism because I need a career and blah 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 blah. But when I started, the more I started, just chilling out and being open to the experience of learning a different style of writing, a different way of storytelling, I started to appreciate journalism, and there were some ways that I was actually fulfilled with journalism. Like journalism fulfilled me in ways that poetry couldn't, and vice versa. So it was good having that, but then it also made me a multi-genre writer because of my journalism background. I was able to like review other poets, write essays, do other things like that. But yes, I did. I studied journalism in undergrad, and was fortunate enough that Howard University has a great program with reporters from the New York, from Washington Post, Detroit Free Press, and so my teachers were like copy editors at the Washington Post, or reporters from Detroit Free Press, and I think Mr. Dixon, who was chair of the journalism program, Pulitzer Prize winning poet. So we had like, I'm studying under all of these award winning writers, and they were really putting us through some real world experiences and helping us generate stories, and but it was a good experience, and I think at some point, like in writing articles and stuff, the poet, it was cool having different writing techniques in my arsenal. So there would be some instances where the poetry would kind of pop up in my journalism. I may do a piece where I'm personifying something or using different poetic devices to put a fresh spin on something. But yeah, I studied journalism. Print journalism was my major, and then my minor was African studies. Oh, so interesting thing about journalism at that time. So yeah, I told you it started at University of Maryland, and then ended up at Howard. So I was actually graduated later than I should have. But it was a good opportunity because at that time, excuse me, Howard, again with their partnership with the Washington Post, um, we that partnership led to the journalism students. I was part of a journalism student team that went to New Orleans to do some coverage post Katrina, and so we had to figure out what we wanted. Each of us, every one of us had to pick our own project, what we were gonna go down and report on, and so I ended up doing an article on New Orleans residents who were living with HIV, and how Hurricane Katrina kind of had their health and their medicine in limbo. And so I actually, during my time in New Orleans, I spent time in a home with other New Orleans residents living with HIV/AIDS, and learning to gain their trust, and and then them sharing their stories with me. And so it was, I think the other interesting thing about journalism was I think it actually came after I graduated from Howard. So it was when I was at the Afro, and really just kind of lifting the stories of marginalized communities. That was that was interesting for me. I mean, I had learned so much because I didn't know that it was this history between Johns Hopkins and East Baltimore residents, and so it was a learning experience for me. And the three-part series I wrote, and that ended up getting a lot of attention, um, was this history of the community, how the community viewed Johns Hopkins as the boogeyman, but then, it also looked at some things Johns Hopkins had did that helped add some credibility to that boogeyman, narrative that the community had for it. So I think it was really, yeah, it was just really that was an interesting time in journalism. So I'm looking at your other question. It's talking about masters in poetry, and so I'll just say that I don't want. I'll just start by saying that you don't need a master's to write poetry. You don't need a master's to publish and to be a successful poet. There's a lot of poets I know that have published and don't have a master's. I went and got my master's because I was no longer working at the Afro. I was unemployed, and I had always been telling my wife, "Oh, I'm going to get my MFA. I'm going to get my MFA," and my wife was like, "Well, um, we're both unemployed because she went into her master's program full time." She said, "What better time than now to go get your MFA?" So I used the MFA as an excuse really to study under writers that I admire. So like Tim Siebels, Patricia Smith, Joy Harjo. And I'll say that oh no poems came out of the New Orleans or Baltimore experience. So I just answered that question. But with the master's program, the reason why it was valuable to me is because if I had just gone and gotten an MFA just to get an MFA, to teach, then the experience wouldn't have meant much to me. But I think the MFA, what it did was because I was interacting with other writers, I was doing a low res program in Maine. And so because I was interacting with other writers, I was building another community there. And so this community of writers, like it opened opportunities for me. It put me in contact with faculty members like Joy Harjo, who ended up blurbing my second book when it came out. And then it was crazy because after she blurbed it, then she gets announced as the U.S. Poet Laureate. So it put me in contact with a lot of important people, and I got a lot of great opportunities that came out of that. But then I think the the greatest thing that came out of it was the second book because that was my graduate thesis, and that's what was published. But the MFA I think was very valuable to me because it gave me more time to study the craft. Prior to the MFA, and I've told Tim Siebels and Joy Harjo this, and I've actually joked about this with Joy Harjo. Was I was writing shorter poems before the MFA because I didn't think I was scared to try to write longer poems. I thought that there was no way that I could do that without a poem falling apart. And then so Tim, who mentored me like two of the semesters I was there, really showed me this trick to like how to add to the poem, how to explore different parts of a poem. And next thing you know, a poem that was maybe about 6 stanzas in the beginning, or maybe about 9 stanzas in the beginning, ends up being like a 30 stanza piece, and Joy Harjo, I think the joke with her was like I would joke with Joy Harjo and say that during the MFA program, she was like my fitness trainer. She was standing over my poems like, come on, you can do it. And, like she really pushed me to add some muscle, the imagery and all these other techniques to the work. I got my MFA at the University of Southern Maine, and the program is called the Stone Coast MFA program, but it was at the University of Southern Maine. Oh, yeah, it's so um yeah, why nothing came out of New Orleans or Baltimore. So I am it's funny, like every writer has their own process. So I've never been, a writer where like there's some writers like an issue comes up and boom, they are on it. Like I'm thinking about the poet Suhair Ahmad. I would never want to piss Suhair Ahmad off because she will write like, maybe a 4.5 page poem, and then everybody will know who you are because Suhair Ahmad because of who she is. But my process was always slow. Like if something happened, a lot of my friends who were quicker writers would have already written it. Da, 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 da. But me, once I write about something, like the trend has already happened and it's gone. But the benefit for me of not jumping on stuff quick is that I kind of feel like I'm forced to take a more nuanced approach. So like I can't go at an issue on the surface, because it's already happened. It's not new anymore. I have to find, if I'm writing about something, there has to be another entry point for me, and I have to be able to go to certain places in that poem that I have not seen or have not read about in the poems about whatever the issue is that I'm writing about. And so, yeah, New Orleans, and Baltimore, I wasn't in those places long enough to really absorb and really, output anything from those experiences. Or at least not there long enough to write anything substantive and genuine about it without looking like I was, trying to throw a hook onto something that was hot or whatever. So that's why nothing came out. Okay, at this point, what would you want to be? At this point, would you want to be a writer in one form, or do you still enjoy writing? No, I enjoy being a multi-genre writer. Grace Cavalieri, the poet laureate of Maryland. Um, Even before she was the poet laureate of Maryland, she was always telling me and other writers the importance of writing in different genres. She would always say that the poet's work is not just to write poems, but to help uplift other poets. And you do that by writing reviews, by doing annotations, and really lifting other writers' works into conversations. And so I didn't start, grad school was when I started doing that. And my blog just, people were really enjoying those annotations that I was doing because I was applying my journalism background. And so it was, the annotations almost kind of had like a human interest feel mixed with the book review. And but yeah, so that, when I was doing that, I think Grace had sent me an email, and because she had been reading my blog, and she was like, she really appreciated, she told me she really appreciated the work that I was doing, helping to uplift other writers and bringing their work into the national conversation. So I think being multi-genre allows you to do that, and it also opens so many doors for you to get your name out there, but to also serve your community. Mm. So, how important is your work as a teacher to use a writer? And then, so, um, yeah, I think when I was teaching, I don't teach anymore, but when I was teaching, um, I knew that I was gonna be, my role was to help, guide the younger writers, but I also came into it, trying to be open enough to see what I could also learn from my students. And so, as a teacher, one of the cool things was just, one of the things I enjoyed, and I saw this as a teacher at Duke Ellington, I saw this as a teacher in an arts program with the DC Creative Writing Workshop over at Hart Middle School, was it was awesome just watching younger writers just flourish. And, you give them an assignment and they just kill it. And I think one of the values of being a teacher was actually learning from my students. I think being a teacher, the reason why it was important was it kept me grounded in what, the everyday things that people went through. I would learn, I would get that from my students' poems. And, yeah, it just helped keep me grounded because I know people who, they're fortunate enough to teach in academia, and a lot of, I don't know, a lot of academic poets, they're very they're very, there are some great academic poets, and then there's some academic poets whose work I read and it sounds like they're writing to other academic poets. And it's, a lot of the literary tricks and stuff that they're doing, it's kind of like a look mom no hands to other academic poets, but and so the work is not grounded in a reality for people outside of academia. So I think that my students, teaching at Hart, teaching at Duke Ellington, hearing their poems of both, hardships but celebrations, things that they celebrated, their triumphs and their, failures, struggles. It kept me grounded in the everyday things that people are dealing with, which, trickled into my work, help keep me grounded in what I'm doing and what the purpose of my work is. And I think, what is it? See, as important as work as a teacher. And then I say it's being a husband and father, and I'll just answer this real quick and then jump to the other question. As husband and father, I did feel like a parent figure to my students. Because I try to be nurturing, but then I also had to be strict with them. I had to be, just had to, just be hard with them to keep them in line, but also nurturing too. And it's funny because a lot of that has trickled over into my parenting. And my wife will actually joke and call me the commander. Yo, you coming with this commanding style, with the girls. But it's when I'm dealing with my daughters, like I'm remembering how in the classroom, I have to, I kind of have to, lay the rules down so that they, because they're gonna try to take advantage, and so just kind of lay the what's required of them and consequences when they don't do what they're supposed to do. And so that definitely comes from me being a teacher. So I think me being, I talked about how it was important in my writing, but also how it's kind of trickled over into my parenting style. Okay, what advice would you give yourself as a younger writer that would have been really helpful for you and preparing yourself for the life you have now? So I think the advice that Alan now would give younger Alan would be to just be open. Because at one point I thought that my journey, I thought that I was just going to be a writer. There was nothing else. There was no room for any other creative avenues. But like, I'm a writer, I'm a videographer, now a 3D artist, motion graphics, and at the younger Allen would have fought against that and been like, nah, I'm just gonna stay focused on writing. But it's because now, I've allowed myself to be open to these other artistic disciplines that not only has those disciplines opened opportunities for me professionally and creatively, but it's also it's I'm seeing a way of like how they're kind of married to each other. So like, because of the videography, I'm doing poetry videos. The poetry is also coming. It's going to be manifested in other ways. Because I have some experience with audio. I did with my publisher's permission, I was able to turn my first book into an audio book that was sound designed and everything. So yeah, I would tell my younger self to just be open to every creative possibility and to embrace it and don't worry about those other opportunities hindering me as a writer, because they're not taking anything away from, those disciplines aren't taking anything away from me as a poet. Do you have any thoughts about that? So I would just say, on this, like I would encourage, like, if I would say if folks are going to self-publish, I have great examples of people I know who started self-publishing and then they flourished, like Truth Thomas. He had a publisher in the UK, but he wanted to publish himself, so he published, I think, his third book he self-published, and then it went off to win the NAACP Image Award. Truth published Brian Gilmore, like the press that he started when he self-published, Cherry Castle Publishing. He published Brian Gilmore. He published a whole lot of Kavikana folks. And he's not Kavikana. That's why I'm laughing. But he published a whole lot of Kavikana folks. And yeah, so I would just encourage folks to, if you're going to self-publish, hire out, make sure that your package is legit, because bookstores, there is a stigma against self-published books, and you just want to make sure your stuff is tight. So I see Silvana on here saying, how has being a father influenced your creativity and writing? So if, when I look back at my first book, I was single. I wasn't in a relationship, so a lot of my work focused on that. It was kind of nostalgic, a lot of nostalgia in my first book, and even the first two chapbooks, a lot of nostalgia. Then I met my wife before I wrote Point Blank, so my wife is present in Point Blank. And then with Crooked Smiling Light, my daughter's already born, and so it's, like a lot. I tend to pull from a lot of my own experiences, so my daughters are more present in Crooked Smiling Light. But then the interesting thing, Silvana, about parenting is that, there was one, I think in the early books, like I made my father this monster, because I, made him a monster because I was looking at him from like the perspective of a child who, had a lot of quarrels with their parents. But, now being a parent and, having a 6-year-old who has a sharp mouth, and, she's got, me, and my dad all have, are smart Alex. And, so having to deal with that, I'm looking at my father differently. And I'm kind of sort of able to understand him a lot better as a parent. And so in my work, when I was writing about him, my focus started to shift from this child, this child with all this, just stacks of like bad memories with their father, to kind of like, okay, now I'm in this position. And understanding, but not not excusing some of the experiences I had, but just understanding him better. And actually, he and our relationship got a lot better once I started parenting. And and I wasn't, once he saw me in that role, being responsible, our relationship got better. But I think now writing about my dad, it's there's some nuances there that weren't in my earlier work. But I also have to credit Tim Siebels, because I went and actually was reading some of his poems and looking at how he writes about his dad. And even though Tim is not a parent, having this older perspective, has really shifted, how I write about my dad. So, yeah. What is your future or current work looking like? And what should we expect in terms of your new work? So when you say work, that's loaded, because, like I said before, I'm a videographer. So I've been doing a lot of work with literary organizations. So I'm looking forward to doing more work with those organizations and other organizations. A lot of my clients have come out of the writing communities, which have been great. So look forward to doing a lot more of that. But in terms of literary work, I don't know. I don't know what's coming next, and that's the exciting thing. I haven't written anything in a while, and I think too, to jump back to that other question, Mozzie, what would I tell younger Alan, is that to not even sweat it. Not even sweat not writing for a while, because younger Alan would have been freaking out. Am I still a poet? Oh, I haven't written anything in a while. But, I was talking with Joy Harjo, a few months ago, and, she asked me, how's your writing going? I was like, hey, I have not been writing much. And I said, I've been too focused doing video stuff. And Joy, we going out to breakfast, and so Joy just kind of like, it was funny. She just kind of went, she said, it happens. And for people who don't know, Joy Harjo is also a musician, and you know, she has also been spending a lot of time, writing music, playing her saxophone, and really getting into being, really just staying in that realm of being a musician. And so we talked about how those other disciplines we're fulfilled in ways. Poetry's fulfilling, but these other disciplines fulfill us in ways that poetry don't. So, um, just be real. But yeah, so I'm not sweating it. It's gonna come when it comes. But I'm excited to see what the new work brings. Okay. So the video work. I'm doing, I'm always pushing myself. So, uh, I'm always, I think now I'm doing a lot more 3D work, creating 3D environments and working with virtual cameras. So I may be doing a lot more 3D animations. I did some for the Hurston Wright Foundation for their Legacy Award event that just passed. They hired me and I did a lot of 3D animations for them. So I'm looking forward to do a lot more of that, but I'm also just purchased a new camera, which is, a powerhouse of a camera. So I'm really looking forward to doing a lot more talking head stuff, covering more literary events. I'm currently doing those for Little Patuxent Review and the Hoko Palizzo, Howard County Poetry and Literary Writing Society, Literary Society, Hoko Palizzo. I've been doing some stuff with them, so I'm looking forward to doing a lot more with them. But that's my video work right now. I think the next thing I have coming up is I'm working on a video project with Brian Gilmore and his law class at the University of Maryland. So putting together a video about his his course on housing, fair housing. So if you follow my social media channels, I'll have updates, when that project is done.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Peace.
Peace.
Enrolling in the Academy is really simple. You'll just go to our website, wblinc.org/academy. And when you get here, you'll see our main page and you can click enroll and it'll take you to this form where you're just gonna fill this out. It'll take you about 5 minutes. Once you submit this, you're enrolled in the Academy and you'll receive an email from me so you can pick the classes you'd like to take and join our Academy family. So we're an after-school program rooted in hip hop. So we have a bunch of classes that you may find interesting. You can go right to our website and go to our classes tab and you'll see some of them, from performing arts like hip hop theater, spoken word, hip hop dance, some of our business classes that are like a boss and walk it like I talk it, which would be more arts management and entrepreneur based. And then we also have things like our music classes, emceeing and rapping and beat production and DJing. You can go to wblinc.org/academy to enroll.